Our moderator is Toby McKenna, Senior Vice President, Client Development, Basis Technologies. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And welcome, Lindsay. So to kick it off, Lindsay, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your role over at Bloomberg?
Sure. Hi. Good to see you again, Toby, and hi to everyone else. I am currently in the office for our virtual meeting. And so I've been at Bloomberg about 4.5 years, and I have sort of two roles. One is, as she was mentioning, is leading consumer marketing for Bloomberg Media. So we have a number of media products and actually the largest global newsroom in the world that most people don't know about, because traditionally our newsroom has created news purely for our terminal product, which may be what you know Bloomberg for. But we also do a whole host of different content productions. So we have newsletters and podcasts. We have Quick Take, our streaming network that we launched last year. And then the bulk of our content actually ends up on Bloomberg.com. And so there's a variety of marketing activities that are part of that role. And the other hat I wear is as the GM of our consumer subscriptions business, which is still fairly nascent, about 3 years old. And both parts of my job are actually part of a broader ongoing journey for Bloomberg Media to really expand our audience and our aperture and be a little bit more consumer centric. And so, you know, as I was sort of mentioning, if depending on what you know about the company, it's traditionally been wildly successful in serving a more niche audience set for a finance professional. But we actually have all sorts of content in politics and technology that's relevant for someone like me or for you that maybe you didn't know about it. And so that's been a big part of the work that I've done over the course of the last few years, and that we're still on that journey to do.
Wonderful. That sounds like a lot. There's a lot going on. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned, I think one of the times that we previously talked and mentioned it also, that there's sort of this cornerstone campaign that you guys have launched. Can you tell us a little bit about that, what it is entailed, and how's it going?
Yeah. So it's called Inventing Possibilities. And I really love this campaign because I think it sort of encapsulates the work that we have been undertaking at Bloomberg over the course of the last few years, and also sort of paints a picture about where we want to go. In general, we are sort of on this journey of customer centricity. And so, you know, the first couple of years of launching the subscriptions business, we're sort of deeply about building up the infrastructure. And so, you know, I don't know if you guys have been to Bloomberg.com, but obviously you can read a certain amount of articles and then you're asked to pay before you to have a subscription and be able to access that content. And so in the beginning stages of that journey, it was really more about like the fundamentals of making sure that worked and just communicating to people what that product is. But as we started to think about what future success looks like for us in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years, all of a sudden you start to see like we really need to lift up now that we've got sort of the basics off the ground, and think about who the customer is and what is the audiences out there that we can start to target and tell this broader story. So we sort of had this marketing challenge where Bloomberg as a brand has been wildly successful in dominating sort of the finance and markets crowd of people. But there's tons of people out there, when we sort of did deep customer research, that indicated they hadn't either heard of us or didn't think that the brand was relevant for them, or didn't know we had things where we might actually already have content that was for them. So we sort of crafted this campaign that's called Inventing Possibilities, as you mentioned. And it started with a lot of customer research that sort of unpacked this idea that people our most loyal audience that did know us, that they come to us for content, tools, and news because we actually help them connect dots and see future potential and possibilities that they can put together. And so we really, I think as a team, loved that insight that was about, you know, giving people that information and tools to be able to imagine and invent possibilities that maybe we can't see today, which just really starts to open up the aperture of what we can do. And, you know, it can be really simple. Like someone is reading a story about maybe a new drug that's, going through FDA regulation, and that sort of sparks some idea in their personal or professional life to do something over here. Or, what does COVID in Italy have to do with the economy that's happening in New York? And you can start to see how all of this global news and information that we produce, like, actually starts to arm people with information. And so that was sort of the defining insight of the campaign. The other piece was sort of thinking about the broad audience set. Again, if we were sort of dominating this one particular audience subset that knows us for markets and finance coverage, there's a whole world of business leaders out there that are interested in broader topics beyond that, like politics and technology. And so, a big part of was identifying who those strategic audiences are. And so we identified 3. The first one was sort of, I think, people who are a bit more in our wheelhouse in terms of decision makers. So that's CEOs, maybe some entrepreneurs, but people that you would think of that are probably already in our audience subset. And then the 2 sort of net new strategic ones, one was actually women in charge. And so how do we actually reach a broader female audience that, maybe isn't sort of intuitively sort of using Bloomberg in their day-to-day? And then the third one was actually young and hungry, which I always love the framing, because I think it really paints this picture of just how many of us are, have been out there at some point in time and are trying to make sense of the world and figure out how it connects to, whatever they deem success for in their life. And so those 3 audiences became kind of the critical foundation layer for where we'd get this campaign out there. And then the next piece became about sort of crafting, the creative and the content to be able to showcase, all of the breadth of the things that we do, because in many cases we actually have coverage, and coverage being content in areas that people didn't know about. So we actually have the most journalists in our Washington, D.C. bureau. So we have really robust politics coverage. We have deep coverage of sort of Silicon Valley and the technology space. But we'd actually, as part of this broader growth and story, have been adding coverage in sustainability, in urban planning with cities, or equality coverage. And so how do we tell this broader story about all of these things we do and how they're relevant for each of those 3 strategic audience subsets? And I sent the video link in. I don't know if someone from Brand Innovators is able to play it. If not, I'm happy to put it in a chat, but.
Let's see. Do we want to play it? But we'll put a pause on that. Maybe they can play it.
We can come back to it. Yeah. You can invent the possibilities in your mind,
There you go.
virtually. So
That's amazing. I mean, gosh, there's a lot going on. That's really exciting. I have to say, it totally makes sense that you need to have a variety of content in order to make informed decisions and really be able to be excited about what's going to be in the future. And here we go. Okay.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks
Well
for
done.
sharing. Yeah, fun. Always love the drum beat.
Well, and also, I mean, there's a lot to explain there. And so when you think about creative and you think about telling your story, I mean, that did, I think, a very spot on job. And I love the, inventing possibilities. I think it's something that, not that many people probably have as the front of their mind, but when you start to talk about it, it becomes very obvious and you kind of want to dig in a little bit more. So speaking of digging in a little bit more, you talked about the different audiences, you kind of talked about how you looked at this consumer journey and the areas that you want to sort of expand in terms of content. How did you go about that process in identifying the content, identifying the audiences? I mean, there's a lot to lift there.
Yeah, with a lot of research. And, I was listening to some panel earlier where, sometimes customers don't tell you the things you need to hear too. So you have to sort of take it with a grain of salt. And I feel like that's where, you sort of have to combine, qualitative or quantitative data with some of these directional things that you're just seeing in the marketplace, and sort of and match some of those things up. So on the content side, we've invested a lot in really understanding like who is our subscriber base today, who's our audience, what do they care about, and how are they segmented across those three that I described to you. And so asking them like, what kind of content do you want to see? What are you expecting to see? And I think some of that research is actually what bore out the launch of our personal finance coverage that we launched last year called Bloomberg Wealth. And it seems so obvious, but it's one of those things where Bloomberg for so long, in terms of finance coverage, sort of has catered to a more high-end institutional investor. And it turns out that for the layperson who doesn't do that every day, we know other people use Bloomberg for that in their jobs. And so we make this connection with the brand that we want Bloomberg to give us that kind of information advice for our own personal, financial situation, whether that's just trying to make decisions about 401ks or how you manage your personal finances. Like it's the same sort of sentiment. And so it was really interesting to hear directly from current customers and prospective customers that was an area that they were expecting Bloomberg to show up and we hadn't yet. And so that really made, I think, the like launch plans to launch that sort of content really easy, because we had these awesome customer insights about exactly what they were looking for and why. In other cases, like we've used just like, ethnographic information about our customers. So what's their full life picture like? What are the things they're doing and that they're interested in? And that's been, I think, a big driver of some of our other content areas. So, if you think about that young and hungry audience that I described, or, even women in charge, these are people who are interested in a lot of causes in terms of just sustainability and climate change. And so that's really, I think, driven a big part of our investment in that coverage as well. And, some other partnerships that we launched recently with Ebony actually, I think really speak to like getting a better understanding of who this whole person is and what are the ways that we can engage with them from a content perspective. On the marketing side, it's driven where we show up, right? And so, thinking about how to break down sort of this broad global business audience, to your point, it can be kind of overwhelming. Like, where do you go? Who do you target? Like, everyone's a potential customer. But sort of starting at our core, like knowing what we are awesome at, and then what's the next concentric ring that's outside of that, and then what's a little bit stretched outside of that, is how we've been thinking about strategically how we grow, because we don't want to lose what's amazing about our brand, right? And what we've, Mike Bloomberg himself or everyone at this company's worked so hard to build is like, you're really good at something. And so we don't want to lose that. And when you go too far afield, I think you risk some of that. Whereas a lot of the investments and the expansion that we've done on the consumer side have felt what we say, like, feels really Bloomberg. Like it fits with our sort of ethos of innovation and growth, and sort of the fast pace, following the global economy in the world, but it's within sort of this box that fits, I think, for those people. And then sort of the other piece of your question is like how we're sort of thinking about where we find them and where they are. It's going to be really different. And I think that's still part of the piece that we're working through. The media landscape is changing so dramatically every day. So where a young and hungry person was spending their time, all day today in 2021, it might be really different in 2022, or maybe not that different, but at least 2 years out, it's going to be pretty different. And so, we've got to really think about where we show up and reach people with obviously this broader Inventing Possibilities campaign message, and make sure it sort of fits. And ultimately our goal is to, expose them to our own products and get them on our website or engaging with our content on, the number of platforms that we distribute on, whether that's Facebook or, a podcast that we distribute through Apple.
Perfect. I love the way you said sort of like you've got this core audience that you've kind of identified, and you want to look at it sort of like concentric circles around that. I think it's really spot on, because I think a lot of people think, oh, we have to go with a total pivot, or, and it's more nuanced than that. And you're right, you have to sort of stick to your natural core essence of what you are and kind of expand from there. And I would expect that, as you look at these three core audiences, you're going to speak to them slightly differently because they're going to touch upon those and interact with that content slightly differently and reaching out to them. I'm curious though, like when you say young and hungry, how are you identifying like what is young and hungry? Like, I'm sure there's some contextual part of it. Is there other data? Like, how did you dig into that? And, I know that you're not 100% ready to know exactly where you're going to target them moving in the future, but like, how did you identify young and hungry? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So I know it's like such a good buzzword, but like, what does it actually mean? So part of it is like pure demographic, right? Under the age maybe of 34 in this particular case, certain household income that, is obviously reflective of being that age, but also means like you're working in certain types of jobs and industries where I think you'd find our content relevant, right? There are certain industries maybe that, certain people just wouldn't find our content as interesting or relevant every day. And then there's, to your point, I think some of this more behavioral or contextual information, because, a big part about our audience and where we've been really successful, like it is an ambitious, worldly, discerning audience. And so, those aren't targetable dimensions, right, in a platform that you can target. And so what are the other ways that you can sort of directionally derive that information if they haven't sort of given that to you? You can get that information through qualitative, but from like a targeting standpoint, that becomes really difficult. So, what are the other ways that they spend their time that sort of represent that stuff? Do they travel, which turns out a large percentage of our audience, a very large percentage of our subscriber audience, which I would call our most loyal, log in from multiple geographies, which is fascinating, right? And so there are ways from a targeting standpoint that you can start to identify whether someone, is sort of traveling or whether they're global. There is a segment of that group that's young parents, and so, if you're juggling a career and you're juggling parenting, there might be other places where you consume media or activities that you're doing where we could show up. If you fall into that sort of worldly or ambitious group, you're probably at the forefront of technology. You might be streaming versus being on linear television, a little bit more mobile savvy. And so, while there's not something nice and clean on paper from, to feed into a targeting system, there are some of these other ways that I think we've tried to think about who that person is and where to find them and target them. And then, of course, there are some platforms where you can get very specific. And when you have those opportunities, we've actually taken the campaign and personalized it a bit for that group, which I think has been fun. It's subtle, right? But if you think about someone who's like a woman in charge and you think about maybe this older decision maker, there might be a couple visuals or messaging that you'd amp up that'd be different from each other. And, particularly when you have a shorter creative asset running, how do you make sure that the time that asset's running, you get the biggest bang for your buck and say the right message to that group? And so those are kind of the moments where you can tailor a bit more.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's funny that you kind of looked at all of those different pieces, and it is a picture, right? All of the little dots finally make up an actual image of what you need to do. So how's it going so far? Are you finding that, your research vetted out? Are you looking at any specific metrics in terms of how this means success to you guys, and what are sort of those KPIs?
Yeah, it's going really well. It's exciting to see, because I think, last year when we launched the campaign, it was really the company's sort of first foray into brand level, advertising and marketing, to consumers. And so what's really exciting is like, it was clear in the metrics that we had that the messaging really resonates, I think, is one. And the other is like showing up really matters, because we hadn't ever shown up before. So we tracked a couple of different things. One is brand favorability. Is this product for me, and how do you view it? And we saw a 10-point increase on that, which was astounding. And I think probably our most exciting metric that we've, of course, been talking about internally with the team and with others. And then we tracked a couple of other things. We tracked actually subscription purchase intent, because ultimately, like, part of the way in which we're thinking about our investment in consumer is because actually down the funnel, we're getting someone ultimately to buy a subscription. And so, we saw a 6-point increase actually in subscription purchase intent. So that's incredibly encouraging, right? For people that maybe were a little bit further down the funnel and had some awareness of us already, this kind of messaging helped round out like, oh, right, you're asking me to buy this thing, but I'm also connecting this to this bigger message about what the brand stands for and what you guys do, because that might have been confusing before. And then the last one is we actually saw a 27% lift in awareness on some of the key social platforms. And so, I think that speaks to reaching some of that new audience, that we may not have been targeting in the past, whether that's in the women in charge or in the young and hungry category. It's going to be a longer journey for those people to be ready to buy a subscription, but even just to be thinking about our brand from more of a consideration standpoint. And so just making some inroads, particularly to that extent, I think is incredibly encouraging, because we're really thinking about this journey on a very long-term basis. And while Bloomberg just celebrated its 40th year in business, in many ways, we're young and we're nascent, and so it's going to be, continue to be a growth journey, I think, for us to sort of make inroads from a consumer standpoint.
That's great to hear. And I love the fact that you've been so successful with it. That's amazing. Curious though, in terms of like consumption of content, right? So you went after this with different areas of content and what you wanted to sort of talk and speak to, and certainly diversify the portfolio of content. Are you surprised by anything there? Has there been a, wow, I knew, causes were going to be really important, or environmental would be, or whatever it might be? Were there any aha moments or changes in direction mid-campaign based off of that?
I think, one of the things that we knew, but again, sort of going back to my wealth examples, we knew people wanted this, but I think we underestimated the pent up demand on that particular one. And so very quickly, we launched that alongside this campaign. It was sort of one of the proof points, if you will, which I didn't really touch on, but if you're going to get out there with your big brand message, you have the product to back it up. And so that content was one of those, but I think we very quickly saw that was a place we needed to invest in, even more than we'd done for launch, because very quickly we saw sort of the audience growth. We saw what it was doing, to help drive ultimately a subscription conversion. And so we've amped that up. The other places where I think there's sort of, fun unexpected is that we did a multi-platform partnership with Ebony, actually. And I think that's sort of one of those unexpected for Bloomberg that really starts to tell a broader story about the brand and from a content perspective. And so we've been partnering with them, on societal and economic sort of inequities with the Black community, but we're also trying to use our platform to sort of highlight some of their content and some of the talent that they have there. Because we have sort of I think what we're seeing is that particularly with the younger generation, people are really looking for more purposeful content, where you can take a stand. And so, Bloomberg, I think at its core, people may or may not know, but most of the company's profits actually go to philanthropy. And so the Bloomberg Foundation is sort of a big part of the ethos here. And so there are a lot of sort of just causes that the company really cares about, and remembering why we do that and how that actually relates to the customer, I think has been just a fun reminder, throughout this campaign.
Yeah, and I'm sure incredibly rewarding. I mean, it's got to be very rewarding. So I see that we've got sort of a warrant, like a timer here. So Q&A to come. I'll give people a few minutes to ask some questions. I'll ask you last one here. In terms of everything that's happened with the pandemic, there's so much going on in terms of transformation. There's a lot that you had sort of talked about in terms of broad global transformation across the board. How do you incorporate that with what you're doing? I think you sort of touched on it a bit, and sort of what are some of the transformations your customers are facing and your team is facing?
Yeah. There's so much transformation. It's hard to keep up. But yes, I mean, I think Bloomberg in general, we really saw a lot of upside in both just our audience and I think on the subscriptions business over the course of the pandemic, because people are desperate out there to figure out how to navigate what's happening across the world. Like if you think about the pandemic specifically, what's happening in China impacts what's happening in the US. You know, what are the travel restrictions? What are the vaccines that are available? And so that's just sort of one example, but there's also just the reality of people and how marketing works and how we show up at the office every day. And so I feel like we're facing them big and small, which is teaching everyone, you know, I think a lot of patience and flexibility in the marketplace and in their job every day. And I know you, speaking of transformations, you at your company also have just gone through one.
Yes, thank you. We have. For those of you that don't know, Basis was previously Centro. So we did a rebrand on Friday. And I think, you know, we really looked at it as, you know, we wanted to highlight the overall vision of the company, which is basically a very technology first in terms of being like the most comprehensive and automated and intelligent software for people on the media buying side. And a lot of that is either on the agency or on the brand side. And yeah, we really wanted to sort of put that out in front and recognize that that's sort of the future of the company. So we are now Basis Technologies. Thank you for asking.
Very cool. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. I am not seeing a lot of, I don't see any questions at this point, but I also might not be opening the right window here. But I guess I'll ask you one last question because we have 2 minutes, I think. In terms of how you're executing the campaigns, are you doing a lot of that in-house? Are you working with an agency? Like, how is that sort of being developed in terms of planning and execution, all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, this particular version of the campaign, we did mostly in-house. And so, which is really fun and exciting to say. We have a number of talented creatives, you know, in-house at Bloomberg. And so tapping into those resources, I think we're a big part of it. You know, all of the sort of strategy, and even in some cases, the media buying even was in-house. And there are obviously, I think as we grow and evolve, you know, we're bringing in subject matter experts externally at various points in time and sort of experimenting with what the right model is. But I think one of the coolest parts of this particular launch was the fact that we really did everything in-house. From soup to nuts, whether that was the brand positioning, like some of the research, you know, the creative development, and we sort of brought in external partners at various points in time, like obviously some of the drum beats on that execution required an expert, but the bulk of the work happened with the internal Bloomberg team, and I think, you know, just speaks to kind of, you know, just the quality of work that can happen, I think, when you've got smart people who really know and live the brand every day.
Love it. And I really love the name of the campaign. I think, you know, Inventing Possibilities is so spot on for so many reasons. And I think it's so relatable. So thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed
talking. But I'm not like showing us like a panelist right now.
Thanks, Toby.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Lindsay and Toby. Our next session will be with Kim Stokes, Head of Marketing at Goodsell, global digital-first senior marketing executive with experience across multiple disciplines, including brand marketing, public relations, advertising, and market entry consulting. Builder of centers of excellence and new revenue-generating capabilities, leveraging innovation and exploiting white space opportunities. Extremely passionate about identifying and empowering great talent. Passionate about with a growth mindset that brings the outside in to ignite change. Also, rumor has it, she can salsa. Our moderator is Andrew Rosen, client partner next door. Andrew has a consistent track record of leading world-class sales teams to exceed goals, always with a focus on strategic, consultative approaches and challenger sale mentalities to educate and elevate their clients. Welcome to the stage, Kim and Andrew.
Hello. Thanks for the intro, Danielle. Andrew, you are mute.
How could I be on mute when I so clearly know exactly? listening to your bio, it was inspiring, and I got excited, and I was like, I think of all the things I could do in the world. And then there was mine, which I feel like could stay just, is hanging. But I'm really excited to talk today. Thank you for being here. I could not figure out my virtual background either, so I'm kind of 0 for 2 right now.
All good.
So I think we'll jump right in. Based on our conversation earlier, it would not surprise me if we ran up on time, because it was a pretty fantastic conversation. But I would love to start the conversation with a little bit about yourself. So based on that bio, plus some other research that I've done, your background is phenomenal and diverse, and that makes it kind of exciting. So you spent a significant amount of time working across different categories in the space: CPG, tech, healthcare, different practices, agencies, and most recently on the brand side. But you also studied international politics and economics in school. And so I'm always curious about